Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NOCO webinar, Road Weather Spotlight, Snowplow Performance Metrics. My name is Matt Jasnews, and I'll help facilitate today's webinar. As a quick reminder, at the National Operations Center of Excellence, we offer a variety of resources to support the transportation systems management and operations community. You can go to NOCO's website at transportationops.org to browse through links for TSMO resources and news. Also, you can find previous webinar recordings and case studies that can be accessed from there. Now, I'll cover a few logistics for today's webinar. We are recording this webinar, and the recording will be available on NOCO's website. All the attendees are encouraged to stay engaged by using the Q&A feature for questions and the chat feature for comments. These are both on the bottom of your screen. We have a question and answer session at the end of the presentations, so if you have any questions, we encourage you to enter them in the Q&A area as they come to mind at any time. Also, please feel free to enter your name and agency in the chat to say hello to your peers. Now I'm going to hand it off to our moderator for today, representing the Federal Highway Administration, Office of Operations, Jeremy McGuffey. Jeremy?
Thanks, Matt, and thank you all for attending today. As Matt said, my name is Jeremy McGuffey. I am here with the Federal Highway Administration Office of Operations. I am over the Road Weather Management Program here at Federal Highway. Today's presentation is one of our Road Weather Spotlight series. We're going to be covering snow and ice performance measures and snowplow preemption. Perfect timing because we're right here in the peak of winter. Next slide. All right, but before we get started, I do have some disclaimers. You'll see these on all Federal Highway Administration presentations. I'll read this real quick and then we'll move on. The presentation was created and is being co-presented by both the Federal Highway Administration and an outside entity. The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are the presenters and do not necessarily reflect those of FHWA or the U.S. Department of Transportation. The contents do not necessarily reflect the official policy of the U.S. DOT. The U.S. government does not endorse products or manufacturers. Trademarks or manufacturers' names appear in this presentation only because they are considered essential to the objective of the presentation. They are included for informational purposes only and are not intended to reflect a preference, approval, or endorsement of any one product or entity. Except for the statutes and regulations cited, the contents of this presentation do not have the force and effect of law and are not meant to bind the states or the public in any way. This presentation is intended only to provide information regarding existing requirements under the law or agency policies. Next slide. All right, so we do have a packed agenda today, so I'm going to try and keep things moving at a reasonable pace. Our first presenter is Philip Castro with the Utah Department of Transportation. He will be presenting on snowplow preemption in Utah. Philip is as a project manager with the Transportation Technology Group of the Utah Department of Transportation. He is involved in various connected vehicle projects and the evaluations of LiDAR technology for use within connected vehicle applications. Prior to joining UDOT, Philip worked for more than 8 years managing and designing many traffic signals, roadways, and ITS projects in the private sector. Welcome, Philip. It's all yours.
Thanks, Jeremy. Hello, everyone. I'm grateful for this opportunity to be able to share an update on our snowplow preemption here in Utah. In this presentation, I'll give a quick overview of how this technology works in our UDOT snowplows, some benefits that we're getting out of it, where we have this technology deployed here in the state, and at the end, I'd like to update you on where we're headed with some of our future deployments, especially one of our projects that we're actively working on right now. Next slide. Thank you. UDOT utilizes V2X, or Vehicle to Everything technology, to provide green lights at traffic signals for snowplows. By leveraging this technology, snowplows that are actively plowing can request signal preemption from an upcoming traffic signal. On this slide over on the right, I'm showing one of our RSUs, or roadside units. We typically install these up on the vertical luminaire extension of a traffic signal mast arm. At each signalized intersection where we've deployed this technology, we set up a map message. which is basically a geofenced area around the intersection. We usually set it up to get about 1,000 feet on each leg of the intersection. So when a snowplow equipped with this V2X technology enters that mapped geofence, and as long as the salt spreader is active on it, the snowplow can put in a request message to the signal. The RSU picks up the message, runs it through a signal command module in the traffic signal cabinet. It talks to the signal controller, gets preemption granted, light turns green, and it also sends that message back to the snowplow. Next slide. On the roof of the snowplow, so pictured on the left is the antenna. Next slide. That, oh, one previous. Thank you. So that antenna runs down a cable into the truck. So this is a couple pictures here behind the driver's seat. So this slide shows two different setups that we've implemented on our snowplows. On the left, you see the OBU, which acts as a radio to communicate with the RSU at the traffic signal. And it's connected to the OBP, the onboard processor. The OBP is the brain of the unit, generating various types of V2X messages. And for this application on a snowplow, it's generating a signal request message to ask for preemption at the signal. The picture on the right is a brand of OBUs that we use that it doesn't require the OBP and can do the generating of messages itself. In both cases, this V2X onboarding equipment is hardwired to the snowplow salt spreader, like I mentioned before, so that it knows that it's when it's turned on or off. In Utah, we have more of the OBU with OBP setup deployed on our snowplows, and we felt like this would help us have more of an agnostic device to work with different OBU vendors. This also kind of stems from back when we were using DSRC radios. Now we've updated all those to C-V2X radios around the state. So we mainly use that one on the left side that you see there. Next slide. So this technology allows plowing operations to be more efficient, removing the snow and ice from our roadways sooner. A study conducted by UDOT in 2018 on 5 urban corridors concluded that there are up to 89 crashes each year that occur when these roads are snowy, icy, or slushy. Also in 2018, we did a study where we tried to get measurements on the impacts and the effectiveness of our snowplows. We realized that this is really hard to measure, and we're still kind of evaluating that as time has gone on. The findings out of that study were kind of essentially inconclusive, and there's various reasons for that. I think what we realized is that we didn't really have good before and after data. Each route, each corridor that you analyze is different. So if you try to compare those corridor to corridor, it's difficult. Also, every storm to storm to storm is different. And so there's a lot of variances there that kind of led us to not really have a solid conclusion. But within the study, what we did get out of it is something that we often bring up, and that's we got some positive anecdotal feedback. We had a season where we had some particularly heavy snowfall, and for whatever reason, I think our system it was down, and that snowplow driver contacted the region and basically said, "Hey, I noticed when your system isn't working. One of my corridors that takes me, an hour and a half to complete without the system. I basically said, when the system's working, I can complete my corridor in 45 minutes as opposed to an hour and a half when it's not working." And that's a big deal for us. That tells us that there's quite a lot of value in that. Again, it's hearsay from a snowplow driver. Maybe he was exaggerating a little bit, but we can see that this really could reduce crashes caused by winter conditions around the state. And it's intuitive, right? If you can have a snowplow go straight on through an intersection without having to stop, it's able to remove the snow more effectively. It can throw the snow better. can throw the salt better. It's not having to start and stop. And if we're plowing and removing snow from the icy roads at a quicker pace, then that's better for all of our motorists traveling on the roadways. Next slide. We have this technology deployed on 12 corridors in Salt Lake County and Utah County. These are our most urban areas in the state that run along the Wasatch Front. We have 89 snowplows equipped with V2X technology. In addition to these corridors, UDOT plans to deploy this technology on a few more routes. You can see pictured on the right side image with the dash lines. This really is just a matter of getting some more roadside units deployed at these various signalized intersections, getting those locations configured with that map, that geofence I was talking about, and some V2X integration that needs to take place. Next slide. I wanted to give a quick snapshot of some of our numbers of where we're at with V2X deployment around the state. I also want to mention that this V2X ecosystem that we're building as part of our infrastructure has the long-term goal of safety. That's saving lives, preventing crashes. We believe that this is what we can achieve with V2X connected vehicle technology. And as we aim to achieve that, we get some neat use cases and benefits in the short term out of the system. So immediately we're enjoying the ability to have snowplow and emergency vehicle preemption. We get transit signal priority for our buses. This helps keep our buses on schedule, requesting some extra green time from the traffic signal if it's running late. We have curve speed warning applications, spot weather impact warnings, variable speed limits, and warnings to help protect our vulnerable road users like pedestrians and cyclists. So we have about 559 RSUs currently, with another couple hundred planned on being installed right now. We have those up and running within the next. We'll have those up and running within the next couple of months. Most of these RSUs are on state-owned signals. Some are on city signals. We have 284 equipped vehicles with OBUs, onboard units. This includes fleet vehicles, so our DOT's work trucks and some passenger cars, as well as our snowplows, transit vehicles, for instance, UTA, the Utah Transit Authority buses, and emergency vehicles. So we've got some ambulances and fire trucks equipped with this. Next slide. I'd like to give just a quick look ahead of some of the exciting things that we're working on right now. This past summer, UDOT was awarded a US DOT grant as part of their initiative to accelerate V2X deployment and interoperability nationwide. We named our program Connecting the West. We assembled a team of partnerships with CDOT, YDOT, City and County of Denver, General Motors, and ITS America. This program allows us to really expand what we're already doing with V2X deployment in each of our states. But a key piece of it is to collaborate and to make our system interoperable across state lines. Within the project, we plan to equip another 450 signalized intersections in Utah with RSUs. We'll install another 300 along the interstates in Utah and Colorado. I realize the maps pictured on the right are quite small, but what I want to highlight is the 1,400-mile rectangular loop with I-80 from Salt Lake to Cheyenne, and then I-25 down to Denver, I-70 to I-15. That takes us back to Utah, back up to Salt Lake Valley. We'll have RSUs installed along that span, allowing us to send out various V2X messaging to equipped vehicles. We'll install 215 more OBUs on buses, snowplows, and fleet vehicles. We'll have a VRU warning application using LiDAR at 20 locations in Utah. We've defined 41 different traveler information messages, so the TIMs, that will be harmonized and interoperable between the three states. These are messages like curve speed warnings, weather impacts, snowy or icy conditions, things like that, which we can generate and send out to motorists. We'll also conduct a lot of rigorous validation testing. With GM, we're procuring a test vehicle equipped with all the bells and whistles and applications to run around and ensure our system is functioning the way we need it to. Next slide. So in closing, just want to kind of reiterate and highlight that improving safety, mobility, and operations effectiveness, as well as advancing technology solutions, are the fundamental goals of this Connecting the West program. Specifically, the goals are to use interoperable V2X technologies to reduce the number of crashes and fatalities at intersections and work zones, along rural corridors, in bad weather, and those involving VRUs. And it's to use interoperable V2X technologies to improve system operations and effectiveness in transit, emergency, and snowplow fleet vehicles, to improve traveler mobility, improve safety, and reduce impacts on the environment. So a lot of great things happening right now. We're learning a lot, and we're excited to move this technology forward. So appreciate your time. Thank you. And back to you, Jeremy.
Great work there in Utah on the preemption and V2X technology there, Philip. If any of you have any questions for Philip or any of the other speakers today, I'll remind you, go ahead and enter them in the Q&A chat pod at the bottom. You can find that, it should be on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. You'll enter those questions, and then the presenters will be able to type responses that everyone can see. And then at the very end of the presentations today, we'll have some time for additional questions, perhaps if there is any. Our next presenter is Deepak Gopalakrishna from ICF. Deepak will be presenting on the NCHRP Snow and Ice Performance Measures Implementation Project. Deepak is a transportation expert with more than 20 years of experience helping agencies develop and integrate emerging mobility and safety technology. He leads a team focused on advancing transportation technology adoption in the United States and manages a portfolio of projects that revolve around integrating intelligent transportation systems for state and local agencies. He is a skilled facilitator and leads stakeholder engagements for projects around the country, including integrated corridor management, connected vehicle deployments, automated driving systems integration, mobility services, transportation systems management, and operations. Deepak, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jeremy. Next slide. I'm going to spend about 5 to 7 minutes today highlighting some recent work we've done for NCHRP on snow and ice performance measures. For those of you who are part of the Roadweather stakeholder meeting, some of this material was presented. But what we're hoping to do today is to highlight 2 states and give them an opportunity and really spotlight some of the work that they've done as part of this project. The final report link is available through this QR code. Thank you to all the participating states. There are about 14 states that participated, and the NCHRP program officer was Patrick Zielinski. So thanks to all of them. Next slide. Okay, the objective of this project was to really advance this notion of snow and ice performance measurement as an important storytelling and management tool that you have within your agency. One of the main lessons I took away is winter maintenance is an incredibly difficult job that many of us do on a daily basis, and with very tight budgets, balancing safety, environmental sustainability, and mobility. And performance measures really are a way to tell our story. And the goal of this workshop was to help state DOTs think through the data that they have, how do they organize it, and what sort of measures really help them with their operations and decision making. Next slide. The work was based on an NCHRP 889, that research report's available. It presents a core set of measures, but it's more than an individual measure. It's more about how to develop a performance framework given the data sets that you have, the objectives you're trying to manage to, and then how do you use those performance measures for decision making. A key point in the report is not all agencies need to have the same performance measure. It depends on the way the agency is structured. It depends on the agency's objectives around winter maintenance and also their practices. So the goal of the report was to show that different agency types across the country can still start on the process of snow and ice performance measurement. Next slide. The process for snow and ice performance measurement was really around 10 steps. One is to starting from reviewing your missions and goals, all the way to integrating into decision making, setting targets, and identifying and evaluating the whole performance measure process and improving it continuously. So these 10 steps are described in about 5 chapters in the guidebook. So if you haven't looked at that report lately, the NCHRP 889 report gets into a lot of details around what is happening around the country, what was happening around the country around performance measurement, and how to sort of organize them into these 10 steps. Next slide. So there's no single measure that describes snow and ice performance measurement. Not everything that you say is performance is fully controlled just by your response. So there could be aspects in an agency's response that's outside your immediate control. Starting the process is the most important step. And then some level of subjectivity in performance measurements cannot be avoided. So this perspective was what we took into this workshop. Recognizing that we all start from a different place. Some of the agencies have a long-standing history of collecting and measuring performance. Some are just looking at data sets and starting to figure out what they need to do. How do you get started? And the goal of the implementation project was to help agencies kind of take those first steps in the performance measurement process. Next slide. So there were 6 states in the first phase, mostly in the AASHTO Region 1, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, Massachusetts, and Maryland. And in phase 2, we added several other states, including some states in the West that have more of a snow and ice control things only in parts of the state, like Arizona. So you get a lot of snow in the northern parts of the state, but so their processes are very good in like certain areas of the state, but they don't have to worry about snow and ice, but they have to worry about non-winter weather in other parts of the state. So we had all these states work together, work over a period of essentially a year with a winter in between, and start looking at approaches to collect data and report on performance. Next slide. So just a few quick themes, and then I'll turn it over to the two state presenters who worked with us on the project. Next thing. Essentially, 3 performance measures were a priority for all agencies. Of course, they all set it a little bit differently, but meeting the recovery criteria set by the agency. How quickly do you recover from an event was one thing that really bubbled up to the top as something that all of us agree is important. There was a second aspect about what is the level of service you want to maintain during an event. So is there a certain level of friction that you would not let the roads get below, or is there a certain level of speeds that you're trying to maintain? That was a little harder, but it's still, there seems to be especially some new capabilities emerging on that. And the third really was winter maintenance also needs to be conscious of environmental stewardship, largely in the amount of salt that's being used. One of the good things about that last measure, environmental stewardship, is a lot of agencies already do a great job in collecting data about salt use and salt and their efficiency of salt use. They're part of agency culture and reporting already. One of the interesting things over this project was the keenness and the availability and really sort of the interest to explore more speed and reliability based measures. A lot of the agencies were excited about the use of operations data, and I use the word operations data in quotes, really sort of getting data from third-party providers, be it TomToms, INRIX here, and Redis, wherever you have data from probes that is useful to assess basically the speed profiles along segments. And then everybody noted that it's performance measures are different for a maintenance supervisor, they're different for a maintenance garage, they're different for a DOT secretary, and they're different for the traveling public and the citizenry. So there's not one measure and one way of telling that story. You need to be able to have more of a dashboard-based approach, and you'll hear from that from Missouri on how they went about that in a little bit. The last point is when we initially started this project, there was this almost almost an implicit fear that this was some way punitive, that these measures could be seen as something that we are doing wrong, or be used in some way to kind of force people into additional activity or in uncomfortable situations. What ended up happening was, in most cases, measures became more of an indicator, not an audit. They were useful for everybody involved, and it was useful to know that fear kind of went away, and it was more about, hey, I didn't know we did this. And in fact, in many cases, what the agencies were really able to report was really how much they do and how much effort it takes to keep the roads going during a winter event. The one other point was, in a year, you will see a data point. It's going to take time for a performance measure to be truly useful in decision making. There's going to be variations between the years. It's going to take a little while for trends to really start showing up, and then decisions made on that. One of the things that all agencies noted was there's a lot of noise between year to year and event to event. So it takes a little bit of while for trends to really emerge and you start making decisions on that. Next slide. And the staff availability was critical. Consistency was another key thing. Understanding storm severity, and you'll hear something from Tina today. And then really sort of making these performance measurement more automated, having more of a workflow between your various data sets and your systems to really minimize the level of effort involved for somebody with a spreadsheet to generate performance measurement was something that really stood out. Agencies that do more have a way of moving data geospatially between systems and into dashboards, as opposed to relying on a data analyst with a spreadsheet to report that. So that's one of the main messages that we want to leave with. Next slide. The value of this implementation project is the work across the states. They all worked with each other. They built off each other. They fed off each other's work, including like, oh, we could do that in our state. An example of that was the work that Minnesota and North Dakota leveraged. Minnesota was doing something with liquid to salt ratio. North Dakota was able to use it. And so that collaboration between peer agencies through this implementation project was pretty helpful. We also noticed several common issues that could be carried through from this project into other pool funds like Clear Roads and Aurora as well. Slide. So today we're going to hear from two state DOTs that really did some amazing work as part of this implementation project. And some of this work was even preceded this implementation project and we just sort of tagged along for the ride. The two states we're going to hear from was Iowa, a state that had a lot of information, had a long-standing approach to sort of snow and ice performance measurement and dashboarding, but really they wanted to think about using performance measures not as a reactive manner, but can we use it to actually plan and forecast and get better at prepping for events? So Tina will talk about her work in there. And Missouri, Paul and Professor Yao will talk about how they combined different sources of data in bringing in crashes, mobility, cost, and the geospatial data into performance measurement. And it really answers sort of what, in my opinion, is one of the holy grails. What would have happened compared to like the do nothing or the baseline? So really, both these presentations were very exciting. We were very grateful to have both Iowa and Missouri participate in this effort. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tina.
Hey, everybody. My name is Tina Greenfield. I am a road weather coordinator for Iowa Department of Transportation. I've been working for Iowa DOT for about 20 years. And as Deepak mentioned, we do have a fairly developed performance measurement system. We've been dealing with weather indices and other weather-related performance metrics and systems for several years. But one of the things that came out of this particular project was something new to us, which is a little bit more look towards the future. Go ahead, next slide, please. So what this index is basically a future storm index tool that is designed to quickly visualize the impact of an incoming storm, and particularly visualize it in a way that makes sense to managers, executives, winter maintenance professionals that have a lot to do with our success as a DOT, and often aren't as weather savvy as some of our maintenance folks are. It also allows us to have some quick comparisons of winter storms and their impacts of those different storms, regardless of their precipitation type or other details that make it sometimes hard to compare, even if you are, familiar with road weather data. And what I mean by that is, we have a variety of winter storms that come through Iowa. We have blizzards, we have ground blizzards, we have blowing snow, we have heavy snow, and sometimes it's hard to compare the expected traffic impact or whatnot when you're talking about a ground blizzard versus a freezing drizzle event. And what this tool will potentially allow us to do is to talk about storms as they come in and be able to put some kind of an impact statement on them, regardless of whether they might be different from maybe another storm that might be in people's minds, or but otherwise might have a very similar traffic impact, even though they're coming in a different way. So how this works, it's basically running on gridded forecasts that's provided to us by our weather service provider. And it's an hourly forecast that goes 32 or 36 hours into the future. And it allows us to basically track how the storm comes in, how it spreads across the state, look at areas of maximum impact, and do some other kind of visualizations on that. And of course, this is a direct outcome of that workshop, or those series of workshops that Deepak was just talking about. Next slide, please. So the index concept is maybe pretty similar to what you might have seen from National Weather Service. They, in the last several years, have started using more at-a-glance severity products in their messaging. I have a little picture here of one that came out a couple weeks ago, where you can see little colored splotches on the map that represent areas of major or moderate or minor impacts, whatnot. And so how this differs from the concept that National Weather Service has already put into production is that this one is going to be particularly tuned towards traffic impact and basically snow and ice operations difficulty. Next slide, please. So the impacts-based scoring is kind of leans on several different factors, and I will hesitate to call this a weather index, because it doesn't include a couple other things that are not weather related, but are related to otherwise our ability to fight that storm or its impact on our customers on the road. So it looks at primarily for within storm conditions, the storm type. If it is snowing, it'll look at a snow rate, whether there are any blowing snow impacts, which it derives from some recent snow or snow rate information in combination of some wind information in the forecast, and then also some pavement temperature information. It also looks at some factors that are basically pre-storm. So we do have a couple of multipliers for conditions that make it difficult for us when the snow starts. For example, the rain to snow condition, where if it was raining and immediately flips to snow, that's a harder situation for us to fight than if it just started straight in with snow, because it makes it difficult for us to time our anti-icing, if we can even get any at all, and makes things freeze up very quickly instead of a dry snow that tends to stay loose and doesn't get us into too many problems for a while. So there are things like that that kind of help kind of bump up the severity if we think that it's going to be a particularly challenging event in a start. Because if it is difficult for us in the start, it has a tendency to continue being difficult once we get kind of behind it, so to speak. And then also it looks at some post-storm conditions. So after the snow stopped accumulating, be it falling from the sky or stops blowing across the road in its, figurations of its blowing snow algorithm, the impacts are allowed to persist so that it isn't just like, oh, the storm's over and everything is back to normal. Depending upon how storms roll through, and again, how this post-storm conditions rolled through, we may be looking at extended cleanup periods that might, basically persist that storm many, many hours into the future than if you just looked at, when the snow stopped, for example. And so that decay of conditions or that decay of severity is set to be happening at a rate that is related to the post-storm pavement temperatures. And then also the sky cover basically relative to our cleanup conditions. And then there are some other impact multipliers that are not weather related at all, but are still kind of part of the equation, so to speak. So there are things like road service levels and the miles that are impacted. A storm that rolls into downtown Des Moines is going to have a different impact on us and to travelers than one that rolls into a rural county, for example. Whether there are any holidays or events going on that may increase traffic or otherwise become, a more sticky situation than normal, and things like first storms. The first storms for us in the season are usually a little bit more challenging as drivers are getting used to having to drive in snow and ice again. And the same conditions that happen in a late November storm can have bigger impacts on traffic than the same storm that rolls through in February after everybody's used to it. So there is also a rush hour timing factor that, again, if traffic is going to be complicating things or weather is going to be complicating traffic, there's also some multipliers to kind of boost those time periods as they are going to be most impactful for our customers. So next slide, please. This is an example of our prototype that we have rolling this year. The blue dots on the map represent kind of relative impacts of this particular storm that I screen capped. There's a total score up at the top, and then at the bottom there's a blue bar chart that represents the impacts as a time graph. So what this tool allows a user to do is each one of those dots, you could just take your mouse and scroll over the dot. It'll tell you the impact that's in that area. You can also just visually tell by looking at the size and location of the dots, the areas that are going to be most impacted. Bigger the dots are going to have the bigger impacts. And then if you are interested in particular locations or whatnot, there's a scroll in the middle that allows you to see that the Grimes area, for example, was going to score a 12.28 during this particular stretch of 32 hours. And then there's some time selectors that a user can, narrow the time range or things like that. The graph on the bottom is a representation of the entire area that is selected on the map. So this is basically telling a user that, there's going to be some early impacts that are going to start late in the day on the 13th, and then they're going to ramp up through the morning of the 14th, and then kind of tail away towards the afternoon of the 14th. So that kind of gives people an idea of the time frames of these impacts as well. Next slide, please. This is just another example of a different storm. I had screen capped this with my mouse hovering over one of those dots where you can kind of see the particular index value. You can see that this storm, when I took the screenshot, was pretty much on its way out. So we were just looking at some lingering impacts as it exited to our east. So next slide, please. So where we are and where we're going. So we have this running automatically in a test environment. It updates hourly, and basically we are, since this was just kind of developed over last year, and then this is our first this is our first year of actually using it in a live kind of environment. We have it basically on a non-DOT or a DOT only test system for now. Once we have it vetted, we'll move it over into probably a DOT only still production system. And our direct non-DOT use is going to be determined still, just depending upon how this goes. But will first probably occasionally appear in our communications to some of our non-DOT partners. Whether or not we have direct control or how we do that after, if it rolls production to be used directly by others is yet to be seen. But again, it will be at least behind the scenes as we are kind of coming up with our game plans and communicating with some of our partners. I believe that is my last slide. At this point, I think I'll turn it back over to Deepak or Jeremy.
Well, I think it's gonna go to Professor. Thanks, Tina. The next presentation is from Missouri. Professor Yao and Paul, take it away.
All right, thank you. So yeah, I'll be presenting on the Missouri Winter Severity Index. And next slide. So traditionally, winter severity index have usually been developed to quantify how much precipitation you have, and not just that, but also what are the societal impacts of that of the storm. Next slide. Most states have, especially those who are affected by snow, have some form of winter severity indices, but the majority of them are basically based on precipitation, how much snow you have, how much freezing rain. It's based on the weather. A few, I think, the blue states try to incorporate some accident rates into their indices, but generally, we primarily focus on the extent of the weather event. Next slide. So this is how why Missouri wanted to try to find a different way to compute our severity index. Currently, our measure of performance was basically how long it took us to clear the roads. That was pretty much how we measured the performance, how we performed. But that was a little bit subjective, and sometimes it's just challenging to put that burden on the maintenance crew to do that. So we try to come up with a measure that is dependent, is data driven, first of all, and we are not just looking at the weather, but we're also looking at how much money we paid, what is the impact on mobility, and then also the safety component. Next slide. The challenge with this, though, is that you need data to be able to do this. So there are different data sets that you will need to put together to come up with a WSI that captures not just the weather, but also you're looking at safety and mobility. So we have all these four data sets that we needed. And not just that, you also have to make sure you connect them. They are all connected. And so that was one challenge that comes with trying to put together a WSI based on this. Next. So to overcome this challenge, we centralized the data, and then we found a way to integrate all of them in one place. Next slide. So just so you know what kind of data we pull in. So for the weather data, we're looking at snow depths, freezing rain, sleets. The National Weather Service has proven to be the best source of data for us. We also use some third-party data, but especially with our recent events, we noticed there were some discrepancies. It wasn't able to estimate the snow depths very well. It's able to get exactly when, I mean, the timing of the snow, it's usually good, but like the snow amounts were not as accurate compared to National Weather Service. So we generally use the National Weather Service data to basically quantify the amount. And then the third party right now, we just use it to figure out when it started and when it ended. Next slide. And then also we kind of use the National Weather Service categories to categorize the different weather events into minor impacts, moderate impacts, just according to the National Weather Service categories. Next slide. And then for maintenance, we mainly looking at costs. How much did it cost us? So we're looking at fringes, labor costs, treatment costs. And all this data is captured right now by our Missouri MMS, the Maintenance Management System, which basically puts all this data together, and we get to use it to compute our WSI. Next slide. And this is just an example to show the cost varies. Like we have different costs for snow, and then when it's just freezing rain. So this data is captured, and that is incorporated into our WSI computations. Next slide. So for safety, we are mostly concerned about the severity of the crash. So not all crashes are the same. So some are just PDO, some are minor injuries, some are fatalities, unfortunately. And so we needed to know for each crash what was the severity of the crash. Now that creates some complexities because if you want near real-time data, you may not be able to get it because, especially for fatalities, sometimes it doesn't happen at a crash. It happens in the hospital, and it takes time to get that data in. But to be able to supplement that data, we also don't only rely on highway patrol data. We kind of use the TMC data and the Waze data to kind of supplement some of the data that we don't have. Next slide. So that's just an example of basically crashes in Missouri. Next slide. So mobility is another component. So the data is usually we're just computing, looking at congestion across the state. And this data is coming from here. We get that in real time. So we're able to compute this as the snow event goes on. Next slide. Okay, so that's just an example of basically the coverage we have across the state of road segments that we can pull the probe data or so this is the probe data is generally travel time data and speeds. So for every road segment, we have the speeds. I think this comes in every minute, and we're able to aggregate it and compute where the congestion is happening during the snowstorm. Next slide. So once we know we have all our data sets, the most important thing is to join all of them together. In Missouri, we have what we called maintenance facility regions or buildings. And what you're seeing on your screen is basically each of the regions, the area that they cover. And so we use this as our foundation, and then we connect all the data sets to this region, this layer. So next, we can then bring in the crash data, connect to every maintenance facility so that when there is snow, we can know for each facility region, we can know how many crashes happened in each region. Next, so we can also pull in the probe data the same way, and then the weather data, which comes next, can also be integrated. So this is the first and most important step before we actually go into the developing the WSI. Next slide. So once we have connected everything, we have a table like this where you can have for each date, we know for each district and each building facility or code, we know what the snow category was, how much it cost us, how many crashes we had, how many miles of roads were congested. We kind of have come up with something like this after the conflation. Next slide. Now, so to develop the WSI, we had two questions we wanted to solve. Whenever there's an event, we want to know whether there was an impact. Now, if there's an impact, we are talking about, was there an impact on safety? Was there an impact of mobility and cost? And then the next question, which is the next, is we're looking at, if you can go to the next. We're looking at, if there was an impact, how does it compare to our baseline? Okay, So we have baseline events, we have some key events, some big storms that we've gone through the past, and we noticed, okay, this demanded a lot of response. These are our biggest, these are our base. We're going to use that as our baseline and compare every other storm to those storms that we know. And so these are the two steps we used to come up with our WSI. Next slide. Okay, so for crashes, if we want to know that whether we have an impact or not, we follow these three steps. We compute what we call PDO equivalent crashes. So PDO is property damages only. We compute the PDO equivalent crashes, and I'll explain what equivalent crashes mean in the next slide. But what we do is the first step, we compute the PDO equivalent crashes during the event, and then we go back 1 week on the same day. If there was no winter event, we compute the PDO equivalent crashes for that same day. And then we basically calculate what's the difference in the number of crashes. Okay, so there's an event on Tuesday, today, to Wednesday today. We look at how many PDO equivalent crashes we have. We go back last week, Wednesday, if there was no winter event, we compute the same PDO equivalent crashes, and then we look at the change in the number of crashes. Next slide. So this is how we come by our PDO equivalent crashes. We're given, so Missouri have costs for each severity of crashes. So for fatal crashes, we're looking at 11.6 million. And for serious crashes, just under $1 million. And then we do have these costs for each of the crash severities. And then what we do is we divide all of them by the PDO crash. So PDO, property damage only. And so in this case, once we do the division, the last column is telling you the PDO equivalent. So a fatal crash in this case is the same as having 947 PDO crashes. Okay, so if you had just one crash during the storm and it was fatal, we are going to count that as 947 PDO crashes in our WSI. Next slide. So that was it for safety. For mobility, we basically look at the 85th percentile of the speeds for each segment. That's our indication of congestion. And then we sum up all the miles, the roads that were congested within the particular facility, maintenance facility. So it will be the sum of all the congested miles during the event. That's what gives us the measure of mobility impact. And so the same way we do it during the event, and then we go back 1 week, and then we compare it to on a non-weather event day, what was the congested miles? Next slide. Okay, so once we know what the impact is, we want to compare it to a baseline. And so now that helps us to compare. We compare it to a baseline so that we will know, okay, how did we do compared to these big baselines. So the baselines we had, these are well-known events that happen through Missouri. We use them as our baseline. So every event is compared to these six events. And so if you get a value that is greater than 1, that means that whatever event we had was actually more impactful than any of these events. And so in the same way, we'll calculate the number of PDO crashes if it's for crashes for these events, and then we compare it to the event we're having. Next. Okay, so basically, if we have a WSI that's less than 1, what it's meaning is that the snowstorm we're having was below the average impact of these baseline events. If we get a WSI that's greater than 1 for any slow event, then it means that we have an event that was above the average for these for these 6 events. Next slide. Now, we're trying to have another way of looking at the baseline, because the baselines we used in the previous slide, now while the snow event was big, it covered most of the states, the amount of snow varied a lot. So some facilities had like 2 inches of snow and some had like 12 inches of snow. So even though they were big events, the amount of snow varied a lot. So we are also now trying to normalize based on the category. So if there's a snowstorm now and it's between 2 to 7 inches, then we are going to normalize it to a similar event, to a similar snow event. And so this is how we kind of categorize our snow events, and we're using these also to kind of as our baseline to normalize the WSI. Next slide. Okay, so in this case, and the WSI that's less than 1 will also mean that the impact of the snowstorm was below average for a particular category. So if it was a category 1 and the WSI was less than 1, that means for category 1 events, that the event we had was less than that, was below the average. Next slide. Okay, so once we've put all this thing together, we put everything into a dashboard. And so you can track things by year, how we're doing. The chart on the left, the blue bars are basically how much the WSI for cost. The red bars are for safety, and the greenish yellowish bars are for mobility. So it looks like the cost has been maintained 2022, 2023, 2024. It looks like it's not changing much. Safety is also almost not changing much. Looks like mobility dropped 2023 and 2024. So you're able to track these. And then you can also, on the right, I'm showing it by different types of storms. So we can see when there was a major storm, how was the impact on the mobility and safety and all that. It's a dashboard that enables you to do this. Next slide. So this is, I'm just showing parts of the dashboard. There will be a slide that will show everything. But we're also able to put, basically color code all the maintenance facilities by how they did based on the WSI for cost, safety, and mobility at the same time. So sometimes you will see the safety and mobility going together. So there were a lot of crashes, so it slowed things down a lot. And then you can also see, hey, how much did we spend here? We did not spend much. So you're able to kind of interactively look at the data in different dimensions. Next slide. Okay, so generally this is the kind of the outlook of the dashboard. You will have maps that is color coded based on the WSI for cost. And there will also be numbers up there. So those numbers are basically, so for maintenance costs, that's the WSI for cost. Crash cost, that's the WSI for the crashes. And then delay, we have a WSI for the delay also. So a 0.85 maintenance cost WSI means that basically we spend below the average for those big events. 1.77 crash cost means that you basically, the event is above the average that we will have for those events, big events. And delay 0.92 is also below the average. Next slide. Okay, so here I selected, so the dashboard is interactive. So just like Iowa, you can select a particular event and look at how it impacted the state. So you can see all the maintenance areas that were responding to the event. And you can also like go down into the maintenance area and look at numbers for those maintenance buildings. But we can see the cost. So in this case, the maintenance cost doubled. And then the crashes also almost doubled. Delay was a little below average. So that's basically the goal of this. It's all automated. All the data sets are connected automatically, and this is updated automatically also. Next slide. So this was one event that happened November 28th and the 30th. There was a storm on, I think it was a Friday and a Saturday. And there was a game. Now, on Saturday, you don't expect so many people to be out, but there was a Kansas City Chiefs game in Kansas City, and then there was a Mizzou football game in Columbia. So, for instance, if you look at the delay map, those two areas which I've read, that are red, it's really in the middle of nowhere. You wouldn't expect delays to be there, but we have Interstate 70 goes through those areas. And people were going either way. Like there were people moving to the Kansas City game, and then there were people moving to the Mizzou game. And the snowstorm hit, and they still wanted to go watch the game. So there were a lot of crashes. So we'll see a lot of there were fatalities, a lot of fatalities, and it slowed down traffic a lot. And so those particular two buildings had the worst delays and safety issues. So it's basically, it helps reflect what was going on. Safety was basically doubled. Delay also was way above the average. We didn't spend much for that snowstorm. In fact, the prediction was that we're only going to get about 1 inch, and we ended up getting about 4 to 5 inches. So it was very reflective of how much we spent and what actually happened with the delay and then the cost. Next slide. Okay, I'll turn it over to Paul to summarize this.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Yao. So we started this prior to looking at this WSI for mobility, safety, and operations itself. MoDOT has a tracker system program that we currently use. And in that tracker program, we're measuring things for safety, service, and stability across all departments, across everything that we do. And for us in maintenance, one tracker measure that we have that falls under service is operating a reliable transportation system. And specifically, it was a time to meet winter performance measures. And so Dr. Yao had commented on this before of we were really looking at what was the time that it took us to get our roads back to a clear condition. And we were measuring that from the end of precipitation until those roads got back clear for our major routes and interstates. And then for our lower volume routes, our performance objective was to get them open to two-way traffic. And so it was a little subjective on when building supervisors would see when was the end of the precipitation in their area. And then also when did that road get back to that condition. But one thing that we were always missing is, what was the impact to the public for those? We were measuring what's our time to get these back to clear, but what was the cost? What was the delay cost? What was the safety cost to the public? And so when we teamed up with MU on this research project and we're able to find a way to be able to capture that additional information of what was the cost of this storm to the traveling public in terms of mobility and safety, it kind of brought it all together for us on how we're going to describe it. So our next, how we want to try to implement this is developing these WSIs as our new tracker measures and being able to show for a season long or if we want to go for a particular event, what was the severity of that event? Was it below average or above average for our operational costs, for safety costs, and for mobility cost? So that's where Dr. Yao and I are with it right now. We've got all this data that's being brought into the Titan app. And now we're trying to organize it all and put it into a way that we can display it to our leadership and our exec team, and also a tool for our building supervisors and our district maintenance engineers to also use this in a way that we can be not so much reactive, but also proactive as well. The event that Dr. Yao illustrated there that we had at the end of November when we had the Kansas City Chiefs game and the Mizzou Tiger game, yes, there were a couple buildings that had pretty high WSIs for mobility and for safety. And those help us kind of going after the storm of what happened in those districts or what happened in those buildings. So we can pull up that dashboard and see what buildings are red for any one of the matrix and kind of evaluate, well, what happened? Was it something that we could have been more proactive for going forward? Or like this, it's a one-time event where you've got a major football game and a major college game all happening at the same time. And there's really not too much that we could have done on avoiding that congestion for that particular storm. So that helps us in saying, okay, we'll see what the severity was. Was it greater than normal or greater than average or less than average? So it's going to help us be able to identify going forward. There was another storm last year in February that went along I-70 that Dr. Yao and I have analyzed quite a bit too. And this storm shut down I-70 for almost 36 hours. There was a 20-mile section on I-70 where we had 2 inches per hour rates and a couple tractor trailers got sideways that closed the route. We couldn't get out in front of those tractor trailers that had the road blocked. And so our trucks were deadlocked in the queues. And it just, and the side roads all started getting deadlocked. And we were able to look at that, and after action items that we're able to take from looking at this helped us going forward on that section of I-70. Now we're assigning more resources to that section of I-70. There's a particular hill that's got 3 climbing lanes on that hill that's particularly troublesome for tractor trailers to begin with. And so it kind of drew more attention to us on, this is something that we're going to have to dedicate more resources to this section of I-70 in particular, and have done that going forward. And the couple storms that we've had this season, we've been able to mobilize strike teams to make sure that we've got that particular section of I-70 covered. And so that's how we're using this app and the dashboards for kind of summarizing a season or summarizing an event after it happens to see what its severity was, but also using this information as a learning tool to be proactive for the next storm and what we could have learned from it going forward. So with that, Deepak and Jeremy, I think that's all we got, unless there's any questions.
Great. Yeah, and great work on this project to both you and Dr. Yao. Missouri's doing some cool stuff there. And certainly I appreciate the focus on safety and mobility. Those are definitely 2 of the top areas of focus that we should be looking at in these scenarios. At this point, with the presentations wrapped up, I'm going to open the floor for questions for a few minutes. And by that, I mean in the webinar chat or in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you do have any questions, please go ahead and enter those now. In the meantime, I actually do have a couple of questions that I wrote down, if you guys would indulge me. First one would be for Philip Castro in Utah. Philip, with the Preemption project that you guys have completed, what were some of the implementation challenges, specifically with getting buy-in from perhaps legislature or folks that you have to get acceptance from before you implement something of that nature?
Yeah, I don't think it was a super challenging thing to get buy-in from them. I think we as a state, we're all looking for UDOT's just, as a department, we're very excited about our technology efforts. One of the neat things about this technology that we're using, especially on the Snowplow, is that it's kind of a system that runs in the background. And I probably could have mentioned that in my presentation, that Snowplow drivers don't need to do anything different. It's kind of a behind the scenes operation. It's not like they need to push a button. It's just having them do their normal operations to clear the roadways, and we're hopefully making that better. And we believe we are. We're able to clear roads faster. So it's really just kind of business as usual, but also enhancing that with this technology and trying to make it better for our users. So.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it. Next one would actually be for both Tina and or Paul and Dr. Yao. Is for both of your indices projects that you have developed, are there any plans or have there been any discussions on making these tools available to the larger audience and maybe like an open source or open access environment?
Yeah, I'll go first on this one if you don't mind. I think potentially yes, but it is early enough in this process that we're not exactly sure what that will look like. The intention of a lot of my index tool was indeed, communicating with people who are not necessarily in the road weather or winter maintenance field, managers, people that we work with outside of the DOT, National Weather Service partners, traveling public. The whole purpose of trying to figure out if the storm is going to be really bad or not is to try to get some kind of action from the various stakeholders. So we feel that we are going to share the information from this, but we're just not sure if we'll do so by posting a dashboard, or if we'll do it by as the information or the storms come in, or looks like it's going to be a real bad one on the horizon. Are we going to just maybe opt to do little screenshots or snippets, or social media posts that might reference or somehow frame the information that we are collecting from the system into something that is, maybe easier to consume. Just at this point, we're not sure if our external stakeholders will be best served by something else or by direct access to the tool itself.
Yeah, and Jeremy, for us, I'd say we're probably along those same lines as Tina. We're still fairly early on and trying to get everything gathered and how we want to display it, and getting the information there. But as we work through those, and I think we get more comfortable with the data and how we want to display it and what matrix to display, I think we'd certainly be open to it. Dr. Yao, have you had any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, from an academic point, I feel like it would be cool to just not reinvent this wheel. And if I'm sure most DOTs have like APIs, and if they could just put in the API and then just on an output, just get the WSI numbers cranked out, it would be great to see that other people adopt it. But yeah, I think that making it open, open to the public, to other agencies, DOTs will be a great thing.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I appreciate everyone's answers. The last thing I did want to note to everybody, because I don't see any questions come through yet, is the NCHRP report that led to the implementation project is available online. So if you're interested in snow and ice performance measures, you can access through the National Academy's website. I see Lauren also put a link to the implementation project itself in the chat there. So you should be able to access both that project and the original snow and ice performance measures report by going to that link. With no more questions in here, and again, feel free, and as I wrap up, to ask questions. But with no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and move forward with our closeout. I have a few things I wanted to touch on before we wrap things up. The first thing is obviously grant opportunities. I think that these are important, and having come from a state DOT myself, I try and make people aware of these as much as possible, because I wasn't always aware of these as they were coming through. So these aren't directly administered by me or my office, but I do want to let you know that they're there. The first one that I want to touch on today is the PROTECT grant, promoting resilient operations for transformative, efficient, and cost savings transportation. It's a discretionary grant program. Currently, it is open for applications through February 24th, 2025. I would encourage you, if you're interested, go ahead and read up on that and start working on your application, because time is running out. You definitely still have time to apply. You definitely still have time to put together an application for it. But there's a lot of opportunity there for you. And as you can see, the award floor is $100,000. That's the floor. The total funding amount for this grant program is $876 million between fiscal years 2024 and 2026. So go ahead and look at some of those project opportunities there. Go to that link there. I think we'll have it posted in the chat. But this is a great opportunity. Next slide. The second one that I wanted to touch on is the EID, or Accelerated Innovation Deployment Demonstration Grant Program. This one has a slightly smaller funding amount, obviously, but definitely there's quite a bit of use in the road weather management field here. So this grant program provides up to $10 million in fiscal year 2023 and up to $12.5 million funded in fiscal years 2024 to 2026. Obviously, targeting much smaller projects, but as you can see from our list there below, Connecticut DOT and New Jersey have implemented some pretty cool technologies using this grant funding, particularly with AVL and weather savvy roads and the traffic management centers. Next slide. And I would be remiss to not touch on some publications. We're always putting out publications and products for folks to use. Here's a brief list of some that we've put out here recently. If you go to those links, or if you just go to the road weather management page on FHWA's site, then you can get access to these and any others that we've put out over the years. Next slide. And then also, this is a series. So the next Road Weather Management Spotlight webinar in this series will take place on March 5th, 2025, between 1 and 2:30 p.m. Eastern. The topic will be advancements in flood management for maintenance and operations. This may or may not turn into a two-part series, but please go ahead and register for that as soon as we get the link posted at NOCO's website. Next slide. And then thank you for joining us today. If you want to contact me for any information on what's been presented today, or if you just have a road weather management item that you'd like to talk about or bounce ideas back and forth, feel free to shoot me an email. I will encourage you, that middle link there, go to the GovDelivery website and subscribe to the Road Weather Management program for updates. We try and put out all of the events that we do throughout the year and some newsletters as well through that GovDelivery page. You aren't going to get inundated or bogged down by notifications, but this is where all of the important items will be sent out through. So please go register through there so that you can get access. And then lastly, we do have a link there for the NOCO program. If you're interested in getting updates on anything that NOCO is working on, including these webinars, go ahead and register there as well. With that said, I appreciate everybody that's joined us today for these awesome presentations, as well as our presenters and NOCO for hosting. Have a great day and stay safe out there.
Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. I want to also thank our panelists today, Philip, Deepak, Tina, Paul, and Dr. Yah, and of course, our moderator, Jeremy. We had a great discussion here today and a great, wonderful content that was presented. As I mentioned in the beginning, a recorded version of this webinar will be available on the NOCO website. On behalf of the National Operations Center of Excellence and our panelists, I want to thank you for joining us today. And thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Thanks, Matt.